Good evening, everyone. I'm really pleased to welcome you all to this event tonight, and particularly because we've had a couple of rearrangements, those who have booked 3 times and have finally got here to this much rearranged event. I can see a lot of familiar faces in the audience and some new people too. So thank you for coming out and joining us, and hopefully we'll have a really lively discussion this evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Fiona Beveridge. I'm Pro Vice Chancellor at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Liverpool. And I'm really thrilled to be opening such an important and timely event. The event this evening has been organised by the American Politics Group of the Political Studies Association with the Centre for the Study of International Slavery, a joint centre of the University of Liverpool and National Museums Liverpool, specifically the International Slavery Museum. So the centre was established in 2006. It's interdisciplinary. It encompasses history, heritage, and modern slavery. Front and centre, it's a place where different communities come together: museum curators and educators, academic researchers and teachers, activists, local researchers, and communities interested in historic and modern slavery, whether from a political, historical, or personal standpoint. You'll hear more soon from Laura Sandy, co-director of the Centre, about its outstanding and groundbreaking work. Tonight's event is the 4th instalment of a national series of events unfolding our shared future, challenge, possibility, and potential in the 21st century. This project aims to explore and interrogate a variety of issues related to contemporary politics, culture, heritage, and education in the UK and the United States. More broadly, it addresses issues facing the UK and the US in domestic, transatlantic, and global contexts, and thinks about a bigger, essential question: what is the value of democracy in our society? Tonight, in our session in Liverpool, Stories We Tell, History, Mythologies, Memories and Monuments, we'll focus on how history is interpreted and represented in the US and the UK. Indeed, this is a really important topic in Liverpool and is central to debates that are driving positive change and development across many sectors, organisations and groups in the city. Our panelists, with national and international perspectives, will discuss how history, mythologies, memories and monuments influenced their own work, and how history and politics is taught and interpreted and also used to mould current political rhetoric and future ideas in the UK and the US. To lead our discussion, we have 2 great speakers: Lavinya Stennett, founder and chief executive of the Black Curriculum, and Sarah Churchwell, a journalist and professor at the School of Advanced Study in London, who researches American literature, culture, and history. Our host will introduce our speakers fully very shortly, but this is an event for everyone to have their say. So once we've heard from our speakers about their work and views, the floor will be open for everyone to be involved and put forward opinions, ideas, and questions. So, before I hand over, I just want to take a moment to say a few thank yous. Firstly, I'd like to thank the organisers, the American Politics Association, who had the vision for this series and kindly invited Liverpool to take part. Secondly, I'd like to thank the US Embassy for funding this wonderful event. I'd also like to thank our partners at National Museums Liverpool for joining us and organising this event at this fantastic museum here on the dock, where so much history surrounds us and where so much exciting future development is planned. So with that said, it gives me great pleasure to hand you over to Janet Dugdale, Executive Director of Museums and Participation, to welcome you and talk about NML's work on the themes and topics that we'll discuss this evening. Janet.
Well, Good evening, everyone. So I'm Janet, as you heard, so thank you very much, Fiona. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you all here on behalf of National Museums Liverpool. So we're a group of national museums and art galleries here in Liverpool and on the Wirral, and tonight we're here right on Liverpool's waterfront, a place with so much history, so much memory, so many stories. And I think as museums we often think about stories, and we think about people, and we think about the stories we have told in the past, the ones we want to tell in the future, and how we do that. And that's really important for us thinking around all the speakers we're going to hear from this evening, but also around this site as well. So here on Liverpool's waterfront, over the last 4 years, we've been developing some ideas about its future, and over the next 5 years, we'll be doing some work which will change how everyone experiences this waterfront and understands this place and its place in history, actually, its history across the globe. So looking out of the window here, we can see the Canning Dock, which was built in 1765. We're going to unveil some ideas and plans around that in the next couple of weeks. We're working on some big ideas around the International Slavery Museum and Maritime Museum. And we're also doing a little bit of work in this museum, the Museum of Liverpool, which is our youngest museum, and you'll have noticed that as you've come through. So it's some quite exciting times for us, but also really challenging, because we're trying to work differently. We're doing a lot more listening. There's a lot more work to do and stories to share, I think, in different ways. And I think that's going to be incredibly important as we develop all of our work. And for us, working with the University of Liverpool and working with our communities just helps open up all of that. So it's wonderful that you're all here this evening. We're going to hear some really important talks and have some many conversations and a real opportunity for everybody to get involved. So I'm now going to hand over to, is it Laura or Christina? To Christina from the US Embassy. So thank you very much for being here this evening. We're really looking forward to hearing your international perspective.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. My goal is really just to thank the people who have come to be a part of the discussion, to the speakers, and to our co-sponsors. I think I appreciate the thanks for the funding, but that's frankly the least that we hope to do in this process. When we first approached the British Association of American Studies about doing this series of speakers with us, part of the message was not only these dialogues that we felt we needed to have between the people of the United States and the people of the United Kingdom, but also the changing nature of diplomacy and politics in general. I think how we understand our place in the world has shifted quite a bit in the last couple of decades. And diplomacy used to be a sport that was sort of in secret and sort of between elite diplomats sort of engaged in boardrooms and having pretty circular, insular conversations. And part of the embassy's commitment in London and to the rest of the United Kingdom is that that's not who we need to be in conversation with. We need to be in conversation with people all over the United Kingdom, and we need to be in conversation on a number of issues. And I've been a career diplomat for sort of 25 years, and this notion of a shared history and a shared future is nowhere as powerful as it is between the United States and the United Kingdom. We really are sort of cousins in both the sort of trauma that we've inflicted on the world, but also some of the good and the possibility for a future. And I think that those solutions really come out of our people coming together to talk about shared challenges and experiences and how we can engage in them together for the good of all of us. And so we're just really thankful to be partnered with the museum and with the university and with the Association of Political Science. And these conversations are invaluable because not only do they allow us a chance to engage with you, but they also allow us to take back to sort of that process up on the hill, a little bit of reality about what's happening and a little bit of hope and a little bit of changing ways of how we do things inside the security zone. So thank you very much for being here tonight.
I always feel like a bit of a diva when I've got a microphone in my hand. I don't know what's going to happen, so there we are. Well, it's brilliant to be here this evening and finally have this. Everyone hear me okay? Yeah. Finally have the event go ahead. It felt like it was never coming at one point. And of course, we've had a few welcomes already, but I'd like to welcome everyone from CSIS and from me. I feel like I'm here a lot at the museums at the moment, and this is nothing but an amazing experience, and I feel like we're growing our friendship group as well as our work group across these different sites. So in case you don't know who I am, I'm Laura Sandy. I'm a historian of American slavery, and I'm the co-director for the Centre for the Study of International Slavery, as Professor Beveridge mentioned. We're a joint centre with the International Slavery Museum, and the head of the museum, Paul Reed, is our other co-director. So I can see lots of familiar faces, and it's nice that people come back, but I've already this evening, just standing in the corner, met some new people. All sorts of people have turned up, people from London, people from Manchester. So it's really great that we can go beyond the city as well and draw people here. And there's lots of interesting projects going on. So I hope people chat a lot, not just in our discussion, but afterwards, perhaps over a tipple. So I'm really, really excited to host. As you can tell, I'm kind of repressing it a bit for me. And to hear from our fantastic speakers. I knew them by reputation, so it's brilliant that they're here tonight. And we have our session, Stories We Tell, History, Mythologies, Memories and Monuments. So I'm going to introduce our speakers shortly, but I'm going to give not history to CSIS, and we've had a little bit from Fiona about that, but I wanted to talk about some of the work we've done very recently, and actually some of the funding we've already had from the US Embassy. So we work with many partners in Liverpool, the university, the museums, of course, and it's brilliant to work across the city, but I think we all know that we need to stretch nationally and internationally. So people like the American Politics Group coming to us, so thank you, Phil, and the US Embassy, again, funding this event is excellent, but we need to be doing this all the time, and that's just my humble opinion, but we want more and more of these gatherings whenever we can to learn. So, actually, and I didn't realise this till I was looking at my notes recently about what we've been doing and putting together a presentation to talk about CSIS. And I actually felt really, really proud of what we've been doing together. But I realised that one of the last CSIS in-person events before COVID was actually right here at this museum. And it was actually funded by the US Embassy for a grant that we had. And it was a sixth form conference and a public event about the civil rights movements past and present. So I'm just going to go through a few examples of some of the things we've done so you can get a feel for this that fit in, I think, with the themes this evening. So what happened was school students, teachers from across the region and a bit beyond, local and international researchers and activists from Stand Up to Racism all met here in this lovely new museum, in a sense. And we spent the day together talking and learning about struggles for civil rights in the US and the UK. We talked about activism, protest, and anti-racism, and then we had a public event at the end of the day. And I won't point you out because I know you'll be embarrassed, but the speaker's here from outside the city. And we had people from America come to this too. And then when I was looking through my notes, I realized that US Embassy had been really generous, and in 2018 you had also funded us for something that's really close to, I think, the heart of a lot of change in the museum sectors and at universities, and something that will allow many, many, many more people to take part. So this event was actually about teaching British and American history and politics with digital humanities. So the digital, taking us forward, open access, things that will really enrich the story if people can take part too. So moving beyond the archive collections and getting things out there. So we had trainee teachers, school teachers, university teachers, heritage professionals from around the region. We had people come over from the US, indeed people from the home of the first president were here talking about the battles they've had to centre slavery in the story at that historic site. And we met at the Anthony Walker Centre at the ISM. And we talked about restrictive narratives, which I hope we're going to talk a lot about this evening, in a more positive, how can we move beyond that? And we talked about curriculums and teaching history and politics. And we had a question that was, how can we reach people between the ages of 4 and 104 in order to engage them? And I'll let you into this little secret that I'm really fascinated with people who've lived over the age of 100. So if anyone in this room, and you're looking really good if you are over 100, if anyone's over 100, come see me over a drink later and I can indulge myself. But really it was about how do we get people who are 4 to 104 or beyond, if you're older than that, to take part in the conversation and do what we talk about that we say we're doing, which is co-production. So, Liverpool then, and just to kind of bring it back to the city and the links that we're going to talk about with America, is an ideal place for discussing what's going on internationally and thinking about all sorts of topics around this theme, mythologies, memories, and monuments. And as we know well, I think everyone in this room will know, it was the extraordinary work and campaigning of Dorothy Coyer and many other activists and trailblazers across the city who tirelessly campaigned for an international slavery museum on the docks just over there. And as Fiona said, it was along with this creation of this museum that CSIS, the Centre for the Study for International Slavery, was established. So we were overjoyed at the university recently when the students voted that they wanted to change the university's Gladstone building because of the family's links to slavery and the wealth from slavery and empire. And of course, the obvious choice for changing that. I haven't changed any of the slides, unfortunately, because was I supposed to click? Oh yeah, there we are. Gosh, no one would know that I'm a lecturer, right? I didn't see the clicker, but so there we are. Just one on there. We're only one behind. There's only one more. So our students actually voted to change the name of the building to Dorothy Coyer to commemorate her devotion to justice, truth, and equality. So finally then, in the infrastructure of our city, in Liverpool, the buildings, the docks, the street names, parts of our university campus are steeped in history. But many stories are yet untold. And we might talk about some of them this evening. I hope we do talk about lots of them. And I hope that some of our online conversation will bring this out as well and make it a bit broader. And in this city, I just want to credit, of course, that it's not necessarily just the people who work at the museums and people who work at universities. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Local historians, the brilliant Black History Group, filmmakers, artists, performers, and our colleagues at the International Slavery Museum. And I do want to say a big thank you to Lois South for taking our guests around the museum. So thank you, Lois. Who are really making the difference. And I'm going to just give a shout out because Leroy Cooper, known to many people, is having a photography exhibit that's opening next week with the museum. So do go and see that if you can. So the university and CSIS are actually incredibly lucky to work with these city leaders to develop outreach and schools activities, public events, research projects, policy work aimed at breaking down barriers to education, and initiatives to address the university's links to slavery, colonialism, and empire. And indeed, recently, and I just took someone to this exhibit before I came down, a new permanent exhibit was made on campus about the history of Abercrombie Square on our South Campus, which talks about the buildings in that area. And it actually includes a long history. It talks about the links to slavery and empire, but it includes work on American citizens who actually lived there. And it talks about the 19th century and the story of course, the American Civil War, which Liverpool are linked to, as well as the long history with slavery. So the fabric and the built environment of Liverpool, and as you said, there's endless connections to America. And so I picked up just a couple before I introduce our speakers, so that you can see them. I won't go through all of them because I like other people to do research, so you can research them yourself later. But I picked out Maryland Street, Baltimore Street, Virginia Street, and obviously we have our other names. There's been a lot of debates around street names, renaming streets. This is a street in Charleston in South Carolina that's actually the family name of someone who lived in Abercrombie Square. There's Abercrombie Square and all sorts. And just in the middle there, and this I didn't actually know this until I researched very carefully when I read the Liverpool Echo's 50 links between America and Liverpool last week. It's a great article. They've published it twice. And one of the links, and I did know that there was a consulate here, but I didn't actually know, and it's this building here with the eagle on it, that essentially the first overseas United States consulate was actually founded in Liverpool, not London, in 1790, just after the Revolution. I know we should have taken you for dinner here in Côte d'Aron, who've taken over the building. And finally, one connection I was introduced to by my own colleague when I got the job in Liverpool, and they said, "Oh, you do American slavery. Let's get the train home together. We can go for a drink, and there's something you'll really like." And who knew, in the Adelphi Hotel, which could be famous or infamous, I don't know, having been in it now, there is a bar called the American Bar. It's apparently a late night bar, so if you want to go there later, do. Right, I am going to move on from my rambling, and I will introduce both our speakers, and then we're going to have Lavinya Stennett to talk first, but I'll get this bit done, and if you've got any questions for them, you've got loads of questions for them. So here we are. And I will admit one other thing. I gave an introduction recently, so I'm surprised the university let me do this anymore. And I literally sounded like a stalker and then accidentally said this while I was giving the introduction. And it was to the brilliant Caleb Brooks and something else that we did together over in the Martin Luther King building. He seemed to like it, so that was fine. I'd done a lot of Google research, but I was just extremely excited to meet an up-and-coming American artist who was doing work with collections about slavery right here in the city. And he did want to come tonight, but he's actually in Chicago at the moment. So he sends a hello to everybody. So then, our first speaker, Lavinya Stennett, is, as we've heard, the founder and CEO of the Black Curriculum. The Black Curriculum is a social enterprise founded in 2019. It works to teach and support the teaching of Black history all year round, not just in Black History Month, not just at certain points, but to embed this in our history of the UK and globally, with the aim of empowering all students with a sense of identity and belonging. And please do go to the website, there's loads more there, it's super interesting. I won't read it all out, of course. I'll let Lavinya speak for this, as it is her brilliant project. So Lavinya is a writer and an activist. She got a first-class degree at SOAS. I love people who get first-class degrees. She also recently authored a paper exploring maroon ecology in Jamaica and Brazil. And she's currently writing, and it's there. You can actually pre-order it on Amazon. I've pre-ordered it to come out in 2024, Omitted, the untold Black history lessons we need to change the future. You have many, many accolades, because again, I did a bit of stalkering that I'm not going to admit to, but you were named recently one of the Sunday Times' 50 Women of the Year. Congratulations. You were awarded the Trailblazer of the Year by Hello Magazine, and you've been featured in GQ and Vogue magazine, and it was February last year that came out. So again, you can read this online. So I'm sure I haven't done your amazing work justice, but I know you will when you come up to chat to us shortly. So for our other speaker, a little bit nearer the work I do, an Americanist, I was in the American Studies department, is Professor Sarah Churchwell, who is a professor of American literature and public understanding of the humanities at the School of the Advanced Study in London. Sarah researches topics relating to American literature, culture and history, exploring American myths and icons. She's written numerous books. There were so many. Felt so inferior. She's edited lots of volumes and essays. She writes on the American dream, America First, Hollywood, film stars, American icons, histories of interwar American fascism, historical readings of classic books and great novels, such as The Great Gatsby. Oh, somebody moved it for me. See, that's great. That's what I like. And her latest book was out in 2022, and it's called The Wrath to Come, Gone with the Wind, and the Lies America Tells. And somebody this evening has already told me something about Rhett Butler and Liverpool that I did not know also. So we will come on to this. And when you're not doing all of this work, and I don't know how you fit it in, that you spend time as a journalist, you write for The Guardian, The Sunday Times, The Financial Times, or you've written for them, The New York Times, The Washington Post, The New Statesman, The Sunday Times, and many more. And you've also been on TV, you've been on Newsnight, you've been on Question Time, and on the radio. And a sneaky thing I found out is you've done something about When Harry Met Sally, the film. I do not know what this is. I didn't look into it, but you can tell us later if you would like. So I'm going to stop talking because we want to hear from these guys. So I'm going to hand us first over, and if we could give a sort of round of applause for Lynette to come up, and you'll talk first, and then Sarah, you'll come up after, and then we'll join together and take some questions. So thanks very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much. Hello? Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Is it evening yet? No. Soon. I'm really, really excited to speak to you all. I'm really excited to be in your presence. And also, I've seen some faces here before. The Black Curriculum has been something that is... Yeah, thank you. So this has been, I guess, on the cards for a while. And it's been something that I've been really excited to do because coming to Liverpool is my third time. Every time I come here, I think obviously we're faced with the reckoning of the past, but also for me it's an opportunity to really kind of think outside of London, which is where I grew up, and where a lot of the activity and the work happens. So in terms of thinking about the Black curriculum and how it connects to the stories we tell, memories and monuments, I'm going to just go back a little bit. So I started my journey into Black history, into history period, in 2016. I enrolled in my undergraduate degree at SOAS University, and it was the first time that I actually had African lecturers. It was the first time I studied African Studies and Development, and it was the first time also that I was told to put down the books and look around me, get outside, go on some walks, utilize the communities and also the buildings around you to actually find out your history yourself, and also go online, which was the opposite of what I was told to do in development studies. Development studies was all about this kind of theoretical understanding of colonialism. It didn't really speak to or with the communities that were affected, and African studies gave me a sense of purpose. I then went to New Zealand, and New Zealand basically opened up many doors where I was able to learn Maori land law, and also kapahaka. And through that, I think being able to see land justice through the lens of Maori people, but also having the opportunity to go to a university that was on Maori land, allowed me to see how often disconnected our histories are. Prior to this, I was not given the opportunity to learn Black history in a way that empowered me. So what I mean by that, when I was at university, the other lecturers would say, lived experience is not something that we can actually take into consideration here. At college, it was the same thing. And then also at school, I had one project, and thankfully, that project allowed me to really kind of build on this idea of pioneers and individuals who had contributed to the development of the world. But again, those were individuals. And my question is, where are the events? Why are the events of the past still very disconnected from our ability to see today and also 15 years into the future? Why are young people not given the encouragement to go to actually understand the past without the guidance of institutions who kind of dictate the thinking? So I'm all about education that is subaltern. I don't want it to be subaltern. I want it to be a part of the everyday. And this is why we do the work that we do at the Black curriculum. So I'll speak about that now. So the Black curriculum, we've been going since 2019. When I graduated from university, it was the first kind of entrance point for me because I was so passionate, because I felt that there was a lack of education in the UK for all students across the UK to actually have that sense of identity and have that sense of belonging. And belonging to me isn't some kind of distant concept. It's something that is, it's a part of your everyday. It's a part of how you communicate with people. It's a part of understanding your family history. It's a part of community history. And I think when these things are very disconnected and also from policy, we're talking about national policy, Windrush, not just Windrush, because Windrush, it didn't start there, but we've often been told that narrative as well. But if we don't see ourselves as connected to policy, then what changes do we actually think that we as individuals, or even that I, can make? Before we start with the we, let's start with the I. And going to SOAS was that challenge. There were many individuals who are really passionate about the world, really passionate about development and changing societies, but lacked that understanding of how it actually applies to you as a person, and in the sense of Black history as well. So the first, challenge that I have tonight, which actually comes from one of the first books that I read that actually challenged my conceptions about Africa, the past, economic development, social development, was Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. I think one of the things that stood out for me in that book was not just the cases that he, and also Walter Rodney had such a hard time at SOAS, by the way, so I really don't like when certain institutions, namely SOAS, showcase the fact that we had this wonderful historian when really his dissertation was challenged. He wasn't given a place to actually hold space in that university, and that is the same thing for many students today. So again, I'm going to come back to this later, but this idea of the institution, and I speak about it in Omitted, actually benefiting from the work of historians and educators and many of us who are here today. And also being in an institution, how do we work alongside institutions where we can actually have ownership over our materials and ideas? But one of the things that he said in that book was around this idea that we see, world development and economic development as something that has just happened. Africa wasn't given a fair chance to develop because of the interception of European colonialism. And I think that is the same thing here today in the UK, that our ideas of how Europe, and specifically Britain and London, came to be is so disconnected from the labour of black people and people of African descent. And I think it's without this understanding, we will continue to repeat the ills of the past. I do believe blackness is more than just labour, but I think without us actually understanding this perspective, we actually fall prey to this idea that we can celebrate multiculturalism, we can celebrate each other without grappling with the relationships and the relations that have formed the world as it is today. So when we're going into schools in the black curriculum, we do start with colonialism, but we also work backwards. So it's not to say that colonialism is the defining feature of our lives, the defining feature of this society, but it is a part that we don't just need to talk about, we actually need to explore the relations within that. And for many students, when we actually speak to them, there's a sense of relief, there's a sense of honesty. Sometimes, and if I'm honest, there is that sense of being frightened to actually say something that maybe within the school walls will get you in trouble, or maybe allow you to be targeted later on in the classroom or outside. So we try to open up conversations where this is not just understanding history and pioneers and individuals, it's about the relationships, the foundations of society that we actually are seeing today. And all of this, for me, starts with the past, and also going into that past to see yourself. What do those relationships look like today? So to give an example, there's a theme that I love. I'm really into Zanzibari history, and I'm exploring at the moment the spice trade and what that looked like. And so for many students, actually understanding Nando's and how that, that dynamic still plays off today, with Nando's benefiting from, funding farmers in Southern Africa, that is a very tangible and also direct example of the inequality of the relationships that I think we also just don't see because we're not told of the past. So if we're able to draw the past to the present and allow the students to actually have a role in not only sharing their experiences, but who is it benefiting? How do they benefit? Who's going to benefit in 25 years? So you're actually giving them a stake in the conversation and also the action. So we've been going with the same motion since 2019, trying to. Reason I say trying to is because we were knocked off course, I think, in a good way. We're here now, we're strong, but 2020 was that year where there was people from all over the country coming to us to ask for diversity and inclusion. That's not what we do. And I think I didn't know that at the time. I think I saw, and this is me being really frank, I saw money. I had people to pay in the organization, and I saw that within that as well, there was conversations that maybe were challenging at the time, but didn't actually have any longevity to it. And for me, being here and talking about the stories we tell are about longevity. These are not conversations that allow us to kind of tick off. These are not conversations that give teachers and senior leadership the ability to maybe roll out something for a year and then just forget about this work. And so for me, the Black curriculum and how we work is about community partnerships, and true community partnerships, getting out into places within society, not only libraries, schools, but also youth centres where there are young people. We don't really have youth centres these days, but going to football clubs, actually getting the students directly without kind of shaping the outcome of that. So allowing them to direct us where they actually want to take action. So for example, we've just started work with the Halo Collective, and the Halo Collective are about showcasing histories of hair And for us, that's guided by young people. They want to do a zine. They want to create beautiful pieces of work that can be showcased. So, yeah, the stories we tell for me are about, they start with the land, which is why I wrote my dissertation on marine ecologies. I think if we don't have that sense of belonging and identity as it's connected to the land, where do we belong? And then the stories we tell in terms of the communities have to be about the relations, as I mentioned before as well. So it's not just icons, pioneers, people. That's nice. It's nice to know that John Blanc was Henry VIII's first trumpeter that was black. But what does that do? What does that mean for us today, right now? And so our understandings of history have to be about events, in my perspective, and also connecting it to the now. So we're learning from Wales. We've been campaigning for the last 3 years to the English government. We know they're useless, and they're not really trying to do much work there. But what has happened is that there is an opening, particularly within, I think, the councillors and the shadow cabinet who actually want to get this through. And also, Wales have mandated BAME history. So what that means is that, from a top-down level, things look like they can be rolled out. But I think what's going to happen is that the English government are going to wait for organisations like us to keep doing this work and then just stick the cherry on top and say, look, we've embedded black history. But without getting too much into that, what we are trying to do is mobilise communities across the UK to work together so that we actually have something that can endure longevity. And coming back to this idea of the stories we tell, what I want in the next 30 years is to make sure that black history is a part of our everyday, young people's everyday, and I encourage us all here to think 30 years from now. Much of the work that we're doing is for us to feel good, for us to see. It's almost, sometimes I almost feel like I'm living through my 10-year-old self, to recorrect the past, but what are we doing for the students that are 10 now? What do they want to see? And I think that's where my heart is, and I think that's what I would love to do with the black curriculum. So, yeah, I'm going to wrap up now. But in terms of the questions that I'll leave you with is, one, why is there a disconnect between memorials and public knowledge? So what I mean by that is, Sally from Stockport, does she know the importance of these sites? Will she take time in her Saturday to come and understand, to engage, to challenge? And if not, why? Why are we also relying on institutions like schools to engage students? And lastly, how do we move outside the now into the future? So again, longevity, 20 to 30 years down the line. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Am I on? Yeah. I've got a little bit of bronchitis, so sorry if I'm ridiculously hoarse, and I'm going to try to have some water so that I can talk through this. There were so many points of connection between what I've been thinking about and writing about and what Lavinya said, and I'll do my best to pull some of them up as I go, but maybe we can bring some of them out in the panel as well. Thank you for that. It was so interesting, and it as I say, it resonated with my thinking, but from different points of view. But I'll start actually where I didn't intend to start, but because of what you were just saying, with my 10-year-old self, because my 10-year-old self was obsessed with a movie called Gone with the Wind, and it came on free television in America when I was a little girl. And I watched it, and I thought it was amazing, and everybody in it was amazing, and the dresses were amazing, and it was so romantic and epic, and Scarlett was fabulous. I mean, she was kind of stupid, but she was fabulous. Like, who doesn't know that you're in love with Clark Gable and not with Leslie Howard? But, like, I thought it was fabulous. And only very, very much later did I realize that it emblematized, that it completely symbolized an entire culture, an entire society, an entire way of looking at the world that I had been raised to not think about. And specifically discouraged from questioning, discouraged from thinking about or interrogating or resisting or asking any of the questions that Lavinya was suggesting that we all need to ask, and probably a lot of other questions as well. And in a sense, my latest book, which was published last year, is the culmination of a kind of project of trying to undo a lot of that. But I want to begin where I intended to begin then. That's a little prologue now, and I'll come back to that at the end. With a question about Gone with the Wind, because I'd say when I was growing up, it was this thing on television, everybody was watching it. We're in a very different world now. My first question is, how many people here have seen the film Gone with the Wind? Okay, about half, I'd say. How many people have read the novel? Yeah, much fewer. That's always the case. It's a very long novel, and if you haven't read it before and you're not particularly interested, I'm not going to recommend that you read it. For those of you who have never read it and never seen it, raise your hand if you've never heard of Gone with the Wind, right? Everybody's still heard of it. It's incredibly influential. It's still a story, whether you know it as a film, as a book, or even just as a figment of popular culture that is out there that people know about, and you absorb it as you grow up in our culture. You absorb things about it. You may or may not know different aspects of it. But it's inescapable. And one of the reasons that it's inescapable is because it is still, when adjusted for inflation, the most successful movie of all time, which is kind of extraordinary. And the book was, for most of the 20th century, the most successful novel of all time, the most successful American novel of all time. It surpassed Uncle Tom's Cabin, which until that point had been the most successful American novel of all time, which is what you might call a historical irony, because they're telling the same story, but from completely opposite perspectives. Well, not completely opposite. Stowe has her own problems, but mostly opposite perspectives. So one of the reasons that I decided to write this book and to come to grips with Gone with the Wind was because over the last couple of years, although in some ways we might think of it as a relic, as a book that as time has passed, it was almost 100 years ago. It was published in 1936, right? Nearly 100 years old. And lots of people here haven't read it. Half the people in the room haven't seen the film. Maybe only vaguely heard of it. But it wouldn't go away. It doesn't go away. And I'll give you two examples of that, both from 2020. The beginning of 2020, I think both from 2020. Anyway, either 2019, one is definitely from 2020 and one might be from 2019. But the year that Parasite became the first South Korean film to win the Best Picture Oscar, some of you will remember that then President, I always said I would never put those two words together and I almost did. When Donald Trump was in the White House, he, I'm not going to do it. He objected to the fact that Parasite had won the Best Picture Oscar, and he said, why can't we, at one of his rallies, he said, why can't we have movies like Gone with the Wind anymore? Right? And this was in response to the first, obviously not just South Korean picture, but it was a foreign language film, in Korean. And obviously, that was unmistakably a racist response. Nobody had any trouble recognizing that. There was an outcry against him saying that. It was very obviously that was what was motivating his response. And then in the summer of 2020, during the protests, the Black Lives Matter protests in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, HBO Max announced that they were going to stop streaming Gone with the Wind for a while. They were actually going to pause streaming Gone with the Wind so that they could recontextualize it. And what they decided to do, as you may or may not know, was to just put some prefatory material, basically like DVD extras when you're streaming it, so that there was educational material around it. So if you wanted to watch a panel discussion about it, if you wanted to learn more of the history about it, and then there was a disclaimer notice at that they added to the beginning of the film, just letting you know that its depictions are offensive and deeply, deeply inaccurate. and then saying there's more history if you want to encounter it. And predictably, this caused a firestorm on the American right, who started screaming that HBO Max was censoring Gone with the Wind. Now, there was no and canceling it, right? There was no censorship. They paused streaming it for while they could add these materials, and then restored it in its entirety and make any changes in the film. They just added stuff around it to frame it so that people could understand it. But or approach it in different ways anyway. But in the midst of all of these fights in America, very active and very serious fights in America right now over the ways in which our political system is dividing once again over questions of race, white supremacism, and white nationalism, Gone with the Wind kept coming up. It's like you just can't get rid of it. It's the thing that keeps coming up. And I think one of the reasons for that is because it's a shorthand for an enormously complicated history. And although to call a 4-hour movie and a 1,000-page novel a shorthand might sound like a bit of an exaggeration, it's still a relatively manageable and encapsulated way to talk about 160 years of incredibly complex and contested history. And it seemed to me that actually going back into that history and telling the story of that history through Gone with the Wind might be a way of undoing the mythologies that American popular culture has been very, very consciously and actively, proactively building around that history. So that's really what this book project became about. It's really a kind of fact versus fiction. It's a big exercise in debunking, really, is just going through the story. But instead of just sort of saying, well, here are the obvious ways in which this is, not accurate or, check untrue, to also think about what it is that stories specifically do, fictions do, these kinds of mythologized fictions do for us, and thinking about what motivates this kind of storytelling. Because what I think that fiction does, so I'm a professor of literature, as you heard, but I do a lot of work in the space of history and cultural history. And really what I'm trying to do here is to think about how thinking about literature and storytelling can teach us something else about history, which is about motivation and desire and psychology, collective psychology. What makes people do the things that they do? History may tell us this is what they've done, and you may infer from that why they've done it to a certain extent, and there may be records about why they've done it. But fiction often, not always, but often captures much more fully all of the complex emotions and desires and psychologies and fantasies and wish fulfillment that's driving this stuff. And it seemed to me, the more I went back to Gone with the Wind and thought about it, and this is really what I say at the beginning of the book, is that I think that it captured, inadvertently, by accident, completely by accident. The image that I got in my head as I was working on it was that I think it caught like fly paper, like it was this, like Gone with the Wind is like this sticky substance, and all of this American, these stinging, like I said, these stinging truths and these denials and these lies and all of this nastiness just got stuck on this story like fly paper. And if you go back, you can kind of unpick it and see it's like a Pandora's box or something, like pulling all of that stuff back. And you can see it's nasty, but you can see it all in front of you. And for me anyway, I learned a lot by doing that. And the more that I went into the history, the more appalled I was. I went into it thinking I knew a lot about American history and that I knew what I was going to find, and I did not know what I was going to find. And that has been the case every time that I have done a project in American history. I think I know what I'm going to find because I think I'm pretty well informed, and then I dig deeper and deeper and deeper, and it's always more horrific than you think it is. Always. I have yet to get to a point where I think, oh no, that's not quite as bad as I thought it would be. Every time you turn the page, it's worse. It's just worse. So a little bit of what I'm going to talk about now, I'm just going to give a couple of examples from the book. I'm not going to do anything that is, because we're in a public situation and there are people online listening, so I'm not going to do anything that is, I hope, triggering or traumatic. I am going to allude to an offensive word. I do depict it here. I depict it in the way I do in the book, which is to represent it but block it out, and you'll see how I do that. But so I just want to let people know that that's coming up. And then there's another offensive word in one of the stories that I want to tell, less offensive than the one that's about to be on the screen. But I'll just quickly talk about a couple of things. I don't want to go in too long. Many of you will recognize this image. It's one of the most iconic images that emerged from the insurrection of January 6, 2021. There was also the shaman with the horns and the fur and stuff. A couple of other ones, but this one was really became instantly iconic. And it really crystallized for me the reason why I was writing the book. I know, it makes me want to smash things too. Totally with you. And it circulated a lot for a reason. It's incredibly symbolic. Of course, this is the Confederate flag. What some people don't always realize about this flag, there were many Confederate flags. This one was the Confederate battle flag. This was the actual battle standard, the flag that the Confederate Army waved as they went to wage war for white supremacism. Another thing that people don't always realize about the Confederacy is that it was established, there was a Confederate Constitution, and the Confederate Constitution enshrined not just the defense, but the expansion of what they called African slavery. So it was race-based slavery, was at the heart of the Confederate project, at the heart of secession. And the fight that triggered the Civil War, we always talk about it as the fight between North and South, but it was triggered over westward expansion. And it was triggered over the question of whether, as new states in the West, as land was seized from indigenous Americans, would those new territories enter the United States as slave states or free states? And that's what actually tipped the nation into war, into outright war. And that was because the Confederacy was determined on a project of imperial militaristic expansion, where they would seize new lands to expand what they called African slavery, specifically racialized slavery. So that's what that flag symbolizes. And on January 6, 2021, this man marched it through the Capitol Rotunda, and it was the first time that the Confederate flag flew in the United States Capitol, because the United States went to war to defeat that flag. And I say the United States for a reason. The Confederacy declared war on the United States. They were the enemy of the United States. And the United States government, headed by Lincoln, went to war to hold the Union together, but also to defeat the Confederate project, and ultimately to abolish slavery and to eliminate it from the United States. Now, some of you may recognize the two portraits behind the Confederate flag here. He is walking under the nose of Charles Sumner. Charles Sumner was the abolitionist. He was an absolutely radical abolitionist who was almost killed on the floor of the US Senate because of his position, his radical opposition to slavery. And I say radical in the sense of its absolutism, that he was utterly opposed to slavery at a time when people were temporizing, trying to find compromises. This was a man who said this is an absolute moral wrong and it cannot be compromised with. And a senator from South Carolina nearly beat him to death on the floor of the US Senate. He was invalided afterwards. He struggled with illness and disability forever after that. To his left is John C. Calhoun. Calhoun was a white supremacist from the South who called slavery a positive moral good and created the moral and legislative framework on which secession was based. Now, a lot of people commented on this image because it encapsulates an extraordinary kind of moment in American history, and a lot of American history, obviously, from even just what I've described. And there's a wonderful essay about it in The Atlantic by an African-American journalist called Clint Smith that I recommend to you if you want to read it. And he pointed out a lot of these things. But one of the things that he didn't point out, and that I didn't see anybody else ask, which to me is at the heart of the question of what I wanted to get at here, and what I think Gone with the Wind shows us, is what the hell is that man doing in the US Capitol in the first place? Why is he there in 2021? Why has he not been removed? He went to war against the United, well, he didn't, he died. But anyway, he created the basis for, he died before the war, he would have. But the point is he created the basis on which the Confederacy declared war on the United States, and the United States now honors men like him in the Capitol. So what you have is not just a tension. You have absolutely irreconcilable positions at the heart of American government, and it's something that we have not yet and do not, and apparently will not, actually come to grips with and say, which are we, who are we, what are we about? Instead, we keep trying to have it both ways. and literally just say, we can have both of these histories and they can coexist peacefully. They can't coexist peacefully. They don't. They keep erupting into violence, as happened to Charles Sumner, and as this man represents, because he got into the Capitol through violence, right? And you know, obviously there's all chaos happening all around him as he's marching through the Capitol. He's also at least under arrest, and he might be imprisoned right now, so he is being prosecuted for his actions on that day. But it is still an extraordinary, and I think for anybody who understands the history, it's a really sickening sight to see the Confederate flag there. And in order to understand all of that symbolism, as I say, it seemed to me that Gone with the Wind was a useful way of trying to talk about this. For those of you who haven't seen it, I'll do this very quickly. This is how Gone with the Wind, the film, famously opens with storytelling, with myth. There was a land of cavaliers and cotton fields called the Old South. Here in this pretty world, it was a pretty world, the world of institutionalized slavery. Here in this pretty world, gallantry took its last bow. Here was the last ever to be seen of knights. These are white knights, and their ladies fair of master and of slave. So it's explicitly sentimentalizing slavery. It's explicitly saying that this is a nostalgic, beautiful world that we should regret the passage of a world of master and slave. Look for it only in books, for it is no more than a dream remembered, a civilization gone with the wind. This movie came out in 1939. It came out in a time when Nazi propaganda about the Übermensch, about master and slave, was active and circulating, and it was circulating in the United States as much as it was circulating in Europe. And one of the things that I do in the book is talk about the ways that Gone with the Wind intersected with debates around American fascism, which is one of the stories that's been lost as we, and I should go back, one of the reasons why the subtitle of this book is Gone with the Wind and the Lies America Tells, and the lies in the plural are not just about the Civil War and about slavery. We also lie about the history of American fascism because we say it didn't exist and there wasn't one and it only happened in Europe. Well, there was a history of American fascism. There were fascist groups in the 1930s, and Gone with the Wind entered into an active debate about American fascism and was received in that. And I think it's a part of the story that's been completely obliterated and something that really needs to be recovered. I'm going to talk about two scenes and then I'll shut up. This is one of the most iconic scenes from the film. For anybody who remembers it, Scarlett dresses up in a green velvet dress made from her mother's curtains. The war has just finished. Atlanta has been destroyed. They've lost. She's going to jail where Rhett is, Rhett Butler, who she loves. Well, she doesn't know she loves him because she's stupid. I said that earlier. He loves her. He's rich. He's rich because he profiteered off of the war. He profiteered off of slavery. Laura mentioned at the beginning of her remarks that Rhett Butler has a connection to Liverpool. His connection to Liverpool is that he sent all of his money here at the beginning of the war and banked it. And he emerges from the war rich, thanks to his trading across. He does all kinds of trading across the triangle trade, but he banks his money in Liverpool, and then he pulls it back out again after the war. And Scarlett wants to get her hands on the money so that she can save her plantation after the war, right? So African Americans have been emancipated, but she's still determined to hang on to her plantation, and she needs money to do it. So she goes to visit Rhett and tries to convince him that she's rich, and she wants to trick him into giving her the money. It doesn't work. And it's this, as I say, it's this iconic scene. The reason why it matters is because, in my experience, people often misremember why Rhett Butler is in jail in the first place. And they think that he's in jail because he's a prisoner of war of the Yankees. But that's wrong. The war's over. And he's actually been imprisoned by the Yankees because, as the book tells us, and this is when the offensive word comes in, this is Scarlett's aunt says to her, he's in jail this very minute for killing a Negro and they may hang him. They haven't proved it yet, but somebody killed this darky who had insulted a white woman, and the Yankees are upset because so many uppity darkies have been killed recently. It doesn't seem to bother the Yankees whether folks are guilty or not, so long as they can hang somebody. They are so upset about the Ku Klux Klan. Now, this is an extraordinary thing to write in 1936 in the United States. Because in 1936 in the United States, the Ku Klux Klan was hanging black people. It was lynching black people. And the people who didn't care whether folks were guilty or not were the Klan and white people. And there's a very specific reversal that's happening here. And I was speaking earlier about the psychology that we can pick up through storytelling. And one of the things that Gone with the Wind shows us is that this kind of displacement and projection of guilt, at least in this story, is almost always precise. And it's the exact crime that you commit is the one that you accuse the victim of committing themselves. And we see this over and over again in American politics right now. Trump did it, compulsively all of the time, right? Everything that he did, he accused somebody else of doing. Anyway, it comes up again here. And it turns out that Rhett admits that this is, in fact, the case. He says, once he's released, this is later in the story, he says, "I'll frankly admit that I'm as guilty as Cain. I did kill the N-word. He was uppity to a lady, and what else could a Southern gentleman do?" In other words, Gone with the Wind, the most successful film of all time, is the story of a white supremacist lyncher, and he's the hero. He's the hero of the story. And that's still a way that we don't talk about Gone with the Wind. We don't talk about the fact that its hero and its heroine, its protagonists, are homicidal white supremacists. And they are prepared to do anything in defense of the power that they got from slavery. That's what the story's about. The whole story is about Scarlett's determination to hang on to her plantation. That's what drives the entire story. That's what it's about. And people still talk about all of the ways in which this story might be defended or reclaimed or rehabilitated without wanting to get to grips with this central point at the heart of the story. I'm going to give this example, and then I really will stop. Sorry. But this is really important. So this is, because we said we would talk about statues, and this is General John B. Gordon, who was the head of the first Atlanta Klan, first Georgia Klan, rather. And he is still, there is a statue to him still to this day at the corner of the Georgia State Capitol. And that is, I don't know if you can see that clearly there. Oh, you can't, it's digitized. Sorry, it didn't come up clearly. But anyway, it's on the corner of Washington Street there, and the one that you can't read across the top left there is Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. That statue is standing on what used to be Hunter Street. It's been renamed Martin Luther King Drive, but they didn't take the white supremacist statue down. So you've got a white supremacist statue on Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. The night before Gone with the Wind premiered in 1939, there was a gala in Atlanta for the great and the good, which in Jim Crow segregationist Atlanta meant all white people. So the audience was all white people, and there was a performance by a choir of black schoolboys, and they were dressed up as slaves, as enslaved little boys, in front of a plantation backdrop to entertain the white crowd who were going to watch the film. And one of the boys singing in that choir was Martin Luther King Jr. when he was 10 years old in 1939. And the reason that I tell this story, and the reason I think that this story about Gone with the Wind is worth telling, as I said at the beginning, is because this is not ancient history. Dr. King was killed in 1968, obviously. The Gone with the Wind was published in 1936. Donald Trump was born in 1946. He was born 10 years later. This is not ancient history. This is the world that the people that we are still having to contend with grew up in, and these are the attitudes that shaped them. I got the title of my book, The Wrath to Come, from the great writer James Baldwin, and I just want to give him the last word and to connect it back to the point that I started with. He wrote, "It is terrible to watch people cling to their captivity and insist on their own destruction. I think black people have always felt this about America and Americans, and have always seen, spinning above the thoughtless American head, the shape of the wrath to come." It's an image of reckonings, obviously, and the part of the project, I think, has to be for all of us to recognize what has been spinning above our thoughtless heads and to come to grips with them and to try to think harder about them. And this has been part of my project in doing that. I'm sorry to run over, but thank you all for your patience.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Phil Davis, and I'm chairman of the American Politics Group, and we have managed, or sometimes mismanaged, this series of lectures, which we're now halfway through. It's been a great pleasure and privilege to do so. I'm very thankful to the US Embassy and to the British Association for American Studies for thinking of us when looking for management for this program. I want to thank everybody who's spoken tonight, and of course you in the audience for hanging in there and being loyal after we have to change the arrangements about 3 times. It has been made difficult by railway strikes, by university strikes, and while one is absolutely sympathetic with the causes, it nonetheless does make life a little bit tedious to keep on having to change things. We're very pleased that Liverpool has managed to help us bring this off in such style. It's a wonderful, wonderful place, wonderful event. I'm actually going to fall foul of individual bias. Just by referring to one of the slides of the guy with the Dixie flag. Since I first saw the picture, I was very interested that Sumner was there, because I'm a Rat Pack collector, and I have a handwritten note from Sumner, which I love as a connection to a great man. But the thing, the big picture was up there for a while, and the thing I noticed were the tiles on the floor. Did you notice the floor? Beautiful floor of sweeping tiles, made in Stoke-on-Trent, exported through Liverpool, and still on the floor of the capital. The American Politics Group is what it says on the tin, as they say. It supports scholars, anybody who's interested, students in American politics. Has about 400 members. It's free. You just join the mailing list. So please Google us if you're interested. American Politics Group, you'll find us. We've got 2 websites, one as part of the Political Studies Association, one freestanding. You'll soon find them. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for giving us such a great evening.